What up? What up? That's how I'm always going to start it. I know it's so annoying. I'm just trying to get a feel for this screen casting tool. But luckily for you, there's a 10-minute limit. So I got cut off on part one. So we're going to start part two. And I'm going to start at B, where I kind of was rushing at the end as I had a countdown with 15 seconds left. And I knew I wasn't going to get done. But again, some of the fundamental democratic processes, majority rule with minority rights, simply means that in our country, majorities will make the decisions, whether it be laws, etc. But there are protections in place for minority interests. And I say interests with emphasis because I'm not talking about racial minorities only, although that might be appropriate in this regard. I'm talking about views that most of the time may not be supported by the majority in our country. When you talk about First Amendment rights, when you talk about freedom of press, freedom of religion, freedom to assemble, these are protections in place to protect individuals who may not have views that are popular with the minority. And again, you could get into the case where there are protections for racial minorities, but the First Amendment was primarily put into place for minority interests or minority views against the government. That was the paramount reason for having the First Amendment. So there's a lot of nuances to majority rule with minority rights. Freedom of expression, obviously, in our country, you have the ability to express yourself as long as you're, for the most part, not being violent or taking away the rights of other people. And we have the right to assemble and protest. All of these are put into place, tools put into place, guaranteed by the Bill of Rights, to make sure that our central government was not tyrannical. It was not all powerful. And so when you talk about the processes in a democracy, there is a great deal of freedom that you do not see in other setups of government. Finally, fundamental democratic structures, the structure of our government, and the first three are absolutely essential in our democracy, in our republic, and our representative democracy, however you would like to refer to it as. Federalism is perhaps the most important concept in this course. It's the idea that you have a division of power between a central government and the states. And whatever is not listed in the Constitution as a power for the central government, in theory, is left to the states via the 10th Amendment. You need to know the 10th Amendment. That sets up a federal structure of government. It has nothing to do with dividing up the executive, legislative, judicial branches of the federal government. Federalism is division of power, some powers to the states and some powers to the federal government. There's a tremendous amount of conflict. I had some questions on question 10 in the self-test, and after school, a student brought it up, and I was able to actually see the question. And it talks about what kind of conflicts we still have today. Well, there's a lot of conflicts we still have today. When you talk about, what powers the federal government would have when we decided to redo the Constitution, if you will, and get rid of the Articles of Confederation, there was a big issue of taxation in the federal government, et cetera. We still have those conflicts today. When you talk about the federal government forcing states to enforce Obamacare, tremendous amount of conflict. Separation of powers is, of course, only at the federal government or central government, and that is separating the power that they have into three branches of government. Some would say co-equal. I don't know if they're co-equal, like every branch has the exact same weight of power, but certainly the legislative branch was meant to initially have more power. If you look at the document, the Constitution, it is the largest and longest section of the Constitution. Tremendous amount of power given to Congress. The president would be second in that regard. Not a lot explicitly listed in the Constitution. And as we progress through the semester, we'll talk about ways in which presidents have taken more power that may not have been originally intended by the framers. And finally, the judicial branch, which we'll learn later this unit, really didn't have a lot of power until Marbury versus Madison, perhaps the most important case in the history of the Supreme Court. and the judiciary. Checks and balances, a tremendous amount of checks and balances, and you will eventually need to know all of them, or most of the important ones. But this, again, makes it difficult for one branch of government to gain too much power. So there are inherent checks in the Constitution that limit the other branches of government, and we're talking about at the federal level. So when you divide up the power in the federal government into three different branches and then allow the branches to check each other, it slows down the governing process, the passing of laws. It makes it very deliberate and slow, meaning something has to be a good piece of legislation or good governing for it to pass. So they made it a system, the framers, that makes it very difficult for, say, a new president to come in and just wipe out laws, or a new Congress to switch from Democrats to Republicans and just change all the laws. It is very difficult, and we're seeing that right now with a divided government. The president of one party and Congress of another slows down the process. An ingenious way to make sure that we're not constantly changing laws in our public policy. Finally, the beauty of our democracy is your rights are pretty clearly spelled out. Maybe I should rephrase that. They're spelled out, and the courts will ultimately decide whether, for example, freedom of speech, how far you can take that. But we do have a government that is clearly spelled out in the Constitution in regards to powers, in some regard, certainly with Congress. The president, again, has kind of taken the skeletal powers that they have over the history and kind of expanded them via a variety of ways. But we have the beauty of a written document that tells us what the structure of government is, and for the most part, what protections we have against the government. And that is a beauty of our democracy. Again, something that you don't always see in other governments in other countries. Hopefully this is helpful. We'll see if we continue doing this. Hopefully we will. Have a great night. Go watch some CNN or Fox News. Peace.